not so subtle message. Hello, welcome to Mortality with Meep. Today I'm going to be looking at recent mortality trends in the United States, 2020 through 2021, as of mid-September 2021. The data really are only good till the end of August, I would say. So let's take a look at what we've got here. I'm doing this at the entire United States level, and then I'm going to drill down to specific states. I'm also going to be focusing on specific age groups here. This is from the CDC Excess Mortality Dashboard. I will leave a link in the video description if you want to play around with the tool yourself. This is going to be weekly counts of deaths by age group dashboard. It's not the default view you get. What we're seeing here, for each of these age groups, you have a set of gray lines, 5 gray lines representing 2015 through 2019, and the levels are weekly deaths. So it's a line graph of weekly deaths. First, this gray, so that you have kind of a visual of what mortality looked like for that group in recent normal years, and then a red line for 2020 and an orange line for 2021. And so you have to keep in mind, and I'll point out this for the 45 to 64, you have this red line. So this is a little different from the default view, which just pulls time out from 2017 to whatever the most recent in 2021. But it's a cycle, so this rightmost point here for the red for 2020, then the next point is on this orange curve in 2021, and it wraps around because there generally is a seasonality to death, and you'll notice that in the gray lines, they are a little faint, but in general, especially for the oldest people who, again, it's the most numerous dying generally, you get your peak at the beginning of the year, and that's usually flu and pneumonia. You have the lowest point in the summer, and then it comes back again up in the fall, going into winter. So this actually helps us visualize what kind of things might be seasonal for COVID in years to come. But, maybe some of it is just bad luck. That said, I do think there is going to be a seasonal component where we get maybe 2 waves a year of COVID, one in the summer and one in the winter, which will differ based on geography. So let's just take a look. Under 25, that's pretty boring, very flat. If I just, and this is one of the things I'm going to do because these are all on very different scales. If we just look at the under 25, it's going to let me do that, thank you. Yeah, there's a little bit of noise because we look at the scale, our max is around 1500 here. There's a little noise where it goes up and down, but just eyeballing it, maybe there was a little bit of excess mortality, but it really is such a low level of deaths to begin with, you can barely see anything. So the next group, and let's just do the groups one at a time, I call the younger adults, age 25 to 44. And you can see, and we'll notice this is very different from the over age 85 group, and that's the over age 85 tends to have a wave structure. First wave, second wave, third wave, etc. What you see here, and this goes by week number, it doesn't have the date on it, but this is spring 2020 that mortality starts to rise over the baseline level. And then it's like a new normal almost, that we have this elevated mortality for these younger adults. Now there is a little bit of a wave here, and maybe that is COVID. And that's something we can talk about in a later video. But before this summer 2021 wave, it seems to me, and I have noticed this in prior investigations into changes, excess mortality for 2020 for different age groups and by cause of death, that most of this excess mortality for the younger adults is not coming from COVID. It's coming from stuff like drug overdoses. The next age group is where we start seeing, a real change in scale. and we see something of a wave structure. So again, spring 2020, there was a wave centered around New York City. Kind of a summer. Now, again, this is not really looking like a wave as much as it did for the population overall. And then you have the winter wave. Okay, you end here, end of 2020, then we start over again at the beginning of 2021. It came down, and then we're seeing some of this summer excess mortality. And for the next three, let me just do all three of them rather than one at a time, because they're very similar. And again, these are number of deaths, weekly deaths, and you'll notice that you can see the patterns pretty well, all on the same scale for the three groupings, which it's more difficult to do at younger ages. Note, mortality rates for the 85 years and older are much, much higher than those at 65 to 74. That said, there's a lot more people in the 65 to 74 bucket. That's our baby boomers. And there's a lot more of them than those 85 and older to die. So the rate is much higher for 85 and older than 65 to 74. The numbers, though, are on comparable scales. Anyway, we can see the wave structure, and it gets more and more defined the older you get. That first spring wave, you got the summer 2020, the winter wave going into 2021, and then we've got this little bump for the summer. So what we're going to do is look at this, and let's just start with the oldest people first. I want to treat younger people at a different level. So we're going to do the 65 and up, so the 65 to 74, 75 to 84, 85 years and older. And we're going to start with our most populous state, which is California. So this is interesting. Take a look. So there was a little bit of excess mortality in the summer of 2020. And you can see that here. But where they really had a lot of mortality was in that winter 2020 to 2021 wave. There does seem to be a little bit of a spike in 2021. It's not much of one. But again, they didn't have much of one in 2020. So it may simply be recapitulating what we saw before. So let's do Texas. Okay, so now this has a more prominent summer wave. And again, this is the benefit of taking something that might have a seasonal component and plotting it over each other. So we can see that red hump for these ages very well from 2020. They got hit with the summer 2020 wave. And they did have excess mortality in that winter wave, going up in fall and winter, and that came down. And it does seem it's not quite as bad as last year, but there is some increased summer 2021 deaths. Okay, let's do Florida next. Okay, now Florida, similar to Texas in terms of having a summer and a winter, but it's interesting. The winter wave does not look to be as bad as the summer wave. Well, maybe about the same. Unlike Texas. Go back to Texas. Oops. Get this back on the screen properly. Okay, that's close enough. Okay. So for Texas, we had that summer wave, but definitely the winter definitely looked a lot worse. For Florida, it looked like the summer and winter waves were about the same, and we are seeing, take a look at this, 65 to 74 having higher deaths in this new summer wave. Now, of course, this is recent data. Some of these weeks may get filled out as more data or more death certificates are reported to the CDC. But you can see some of the seasonality. Let's do New York State. So this is New York State, which excludes New York City. They have that summer 2020 wave, nothing. The spring 2020 wave, sorry, spring 2020 wave, nothing in the summer of 2020, and then a little bit of a winter spike, so that's kind of bad, but it's been pretty flat ever since. So that first spring spike, as we're seeing, that's like when you get hit with it the first time. There doesn't seem to be a seasonality to it. If we go to New York City, it's even more pronounced. You get that huge spike. There's a little bit of elevated for the winter, but other than that, it's pretty, flat. Looking at Pennsylvania, which is not in the Midwest, not quite East Coast either. It has that exposure through the New York City corridor. So you saw some of that spring 2020, basically nothing in the summer, and then we have the winter wave hitting it. It does seem to be a little elevated in spring there, but again, that could be noise and that could be some non-COVID. It's not clear. Let's do Illinois. So Illinois in the Midwest, again, we have Chicago, so we did have a spring wave, probably centered around Cook County. Had a winter wave, almost nothing in the summer, and it's been pretty quiet in 2021 so far. Okay, so that's that set of ages. Let's start getting into younger ages. Adults. Actually, I want to get to the adults last. Let's do under 25. So children, college students, etc., etc. As I said, it's pretty flat, but that doesn't mean it's flat for the entire United States. So let's just look at it state by state. California. Yeah, that's just kind of flat. And again, look at the numbers on your scale. It's about 100 people, 100 to 150 people a week. You're going to see a lot of noise. And that's our most populous state, and it's not all that old of a state. So we're kind of seeing all of these, and it's going to get even smaller once we see it for some other states. There's basically nothing going on. Florida, let's go to New York. Not really seeing it. I mean, the gray lines themselves show the amount of age. Look at this, 20 to 40 per week. And I'm just going down, it's just going to be smaller and smaller each time. New York City, Pennsylvania, nothing. And let's see, Illinois. Nothing. There's basically nothing going on with the youth, as they would say, in terms of total numbers. What we really want to look at are these kind of young and middle-aged adults, because there's excess mortality here. Some of it's COVID, and some of it is not. There is a big bump up in mortality going from young adulthood to middle age. We can see, okay, as I mentioned, we can see the wave structure in this age group, but not really in 25 to 44, and it's almost kind of like a step up in the mortality levels in just holding for young adults. Let's dig into it by state. So now we are looking at California. Whew, look at that winter wave for California. That was pretty bad for the 45 to 64-year-olds. And we do actually see a little bit of winter wave, a little increase in mortality for the young adults in California. But, it just seems to be kind of level, heightened mortality for the rest of the time. We look at Texas. So Texas, we have the summer 2020 wave, the winter wave, and the summer 2021. For 25 to 44, maybe there's a summer 2021 wave, kind of. It's, this level of analysis where we're just using data visualization. What can we see? What can we see? There is slightly winter wave, but it doesn't really look like a wave so much as elevated mortality. Let's see, Florida. Yeah, Florida, you can definitely see those the summer waves in 2020 and definitely in 2021. That's pretty high. For 25 to 44, we're seeing that summer wave. So that is COVID, but there is some elevation otherwise, and that might not be COVID from 2020. Again, that could be extra car crashes, drug overdoses, that kind of thing. New York, boom. New York State without New York City, we've got the spring 2020 wave and a little bit of extra in the winter. For 25 to 44, I just see a little bit extra in the spring, and maybe there's some excess mortality, but it's kind of hard to see. New York City, yeah, spring 2020 was pretty bad in New York City. It hit across all the age groups. So yeah, you're definitely seeing COVID deaths. That's the only reason you'd have a spike like that, okay, is infectious disease. Natural disasters don't kill in such a pattern, for instance. It does seem like there may have been some excess mortality, but it's hard to say. And again, for 25 to 44, there's so few people dying in that bucket in New York City. It's kind of interesting. You can clearly see that wave. Let's take a look at Pennsylvania. So, like, nothing going on for 25 to 44. I can't even see elevated mortality. 45 to 64, yeah, we've got that winter wave. But other than the winter wave, maybe something was going on in the spring. But, a lot of it's noise. And then our last one's going to be Illinois. So for Illinois, we saw a spring wave and a winter wave. And there's a lot of noise. There does seem to be, there is something going on with the 25 to 44. And I'd probably want to split out Cook County or Chicago and see if that's what's driving that there. So we're just going to do everybody again and go back to the United States. Because the question is, of course, what can you do with this information? So different things to look at. There has been a lot of excess mortality. I am not showing it in the dashboard here, but some of these age groups had excess mortality that persists, that has nothing to do directly with COVID. It might have to do with what's going on in the world and not being able to, say, go to concerts, go to parties, other things, and that may have had some effect. People not going to school in person, people not mixing in a certain way, and that may have had certain kinds of effects in the young adult population, though it doesn't seem to have done much for children. Though, again, both of these groups have pretty low mortality to begin with, so it actually doesn't take a lot of extra deaths, and this is for the entire country, that you go from like 2,400 deaths to about 1,000 more people for a single week. That's at a very different scale of what is occurring with those who are, say, 85 and older. So what we have up here, almost 25,000 deaths versus what's usually about 16,000, 17,000 deaths. That's a huge difference. Those numbers are a lot bigger and they're a lot easier to see. You really have to focus in on a specific age group to really be able to see that, there is not much wave structure until we get to summer 2021. This can inform you that there's a lot of different things going on. Knowing what's going on can help you understand the situation. Yes, it puts some distance between you and, I'm sorry to say, a whole bunch of death going on. And this is serious excess mortality. This is way beyond bad flu years that we've had any time in the past several decades. You have to go back over 50 years, and even there, the prior flu pandemics that we had did not have excess mortality at the levels that we're seeing, and we can see some of that excess mortality. We saw it in that winter wave at the beginning of 2021, end of 2020, beginning of 2021, and we're seeing a summer wave. And Delta variant, whatever variant it is, I would be concerned that we will have another winter wave, even with vaccination. Okay, and this is more prepare your mind for the possibility. I know it's not a happy possibility, but thinking about what is likely before it happens rather than wait for something to happen and then, hindsight being 2020 or trying to assign blame. Um, the problem is you're like, Texas, Florida. Well, what about if it really does relate to the geography? If we have a winter wave again across the entire United States, which is basically what happened this last time, even with vaccines, well, I'm sorry, it's not anybody's particular fault. This is how this particular infectious disease behaves. Um, there's a lot of illusion of control going around, and people thinking that they should be able to manage risk to zero, and you can't. And one of the things to look at of not being able to manage risk to zero is this 25 to 44 bucket, except for that summer wave so far, and maybe they'll get a winter wave too. It doesn't seem to be COVID. It seems to be other causes of death. And that could be, just consider, this is the trade-off. You do one thing to try to contain this particular risk, and then that lets this other risk out of the bag. No, you're not going to be able to get everything you want. That's what life is like. I'm not trying to sell you something. I'm just trying to show you knowledge and having a clear idea of where things are. It doesn't make one happier about it. It does make one feel like, okay, well, this isn't something I can control. And a lot of people are driving themselves nuts thinking that, it's a failure on their part if something bad happens. That is not true. Sometimes bad things happen. That's life. Okay? So, not saying you shouldn't try to reduce risk, but there's always trade-offs. You're not going to reduce it to zero. Okay? So, next time I'll do some other slices from the dashboard. They have a lot of good things in here, and it's easy to use. I'm just trying to help you understand how to interpret some of the things, and what kind of patterns can you look for. And here, clearly we have wave patterns.